Well, hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Terri Roberts, and I am with DMAI's Empowerment team. We are the trade association for convention and visitors bureaus, and we're thrilled about today's webinar because it's one that we have had great success with in our face-to-face sessions at many industry shows. And we have, I think, what is a very informative and enlightened panel to discuss this topic with you today. So I would like to begin by welcoming our panelists. And first, John Huffman, who is Vice President of Sales and Sourcing with Meeting Alliance. And both John and Rick have long tenure in the hotel background, and so John will speak today from the planner voice, but certainly has this extensive hotel sales background to pull from. He joined Meeting Alliance, which is a full-service meeting and event planning logistics company. They specialize in medical meetings, and he joined them in 2004, and then started up the site sourcing department. So, John, thank you so much for speaking from the planner perspective as we discuss this topic today, and welcome.
Of course. Hello.
And John is joined by our friend and representative from the Convention and Visitors Bureau industry. Rick is a 30-year veteran of the hospitality industry, also someone with a very nice sales career in hotel sales, so he brings that background. And his current role at the Greater Palm Springs Convention and Bureau has Rick guiding the strategic direction of his team and ensuring the economic impact for his community in the beautiful Southern California resort destination of Palm Springs. So welcome, Rick, and thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
And we also have Chauncey Keller with ePro. ePro is our sponsor, and Chauncey is our guest today, and we'll introduce Chauncey at the end of the webinar to tell you just a little bit about ePro. So, gentlemen, here we go, and I am assuming that the planners who joined us today have at some point had some challenges with the timely, complete, and competitive responses to their RFP. This seems to be kind of a hot topic as of late. And so we're going to kind of walk through a session first, kind of have you comment on sort of the state of the industry, if you will. Then we're going to have you all review an actual RFP that is typical of many that might come across, Rick, your desk or your sales professional's desk, or would typically be seen in hotels. And then we're going to have you give some insight on what you think could be solutions for improvement and things that will really bring this whole process hopefully into a more streamlined and effective process for everyone. So let's get started with talking a little bit about the barriers. There's certainly barriers to the goal of this timely response, and I think they include both planner frustration as well as destination and hotel concerns. So why don't we start, John, if we can, with you from your sort of own planner frustrations or what you're experiencing in the current marketplace.
Well, typically when I'm sending an RFP out, and I'm sending many RFPs out each week, probably about 6 to 8 new programs a week, both domestically and internationally. I send the leads out through our national hotel contacts as well as through the convention bureaus. And the challenges that I seem to run into, even though I feel that I'm submitting a complete RFP, would be basically lack of acknowledgement of the lead, either a delayed response in terms of sending me the proposal or no response at all. Many times the quotes that I received are either inaccurate where they've listed the wrong dates, and I think that what happens many times is if the hotel doesn't have the preferred dates, they'll just offer which dates they have, which really doesn't work for our client. Also, a lot of times the proposal, when I say incomplete, is lacking the staff rate, concessions such as upgrades, distance from airport, any of the vital information that we like to include in our spreadsheet when we send these quotes to our client. And a lot of times, too, I noticed that if we're sending the lead to a national hotel company as well as through a convention bureau in a particular city, For some reason, many times, we will actually receive two quotes from the same hotel, and those quotes can be totally different when it comes to room rate, when it comes to concessions or meeting room rental fees. So all of these points really slow down that process when trying to get these hotel quotes to our client within 48 hours of receipt of the actual lead.
Okay, great, John. And I think Rick will speak to, as we move through this information, we'll speak to a lot of the points that you brought up. But Rick, tell us from a destination perspective, what are you experiencing? What are your hotels experiencing? Where does the destination and hotel concern come in?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone to hear that, because of the onset of electronic sourcing tools such as Cvent, Starsight, et cetera, RFPs have increased dramatically. And we started seeing it probably, 5 years ago is when the rise really started coming. And I remember sitting in a corporate meeting 5 years ago, and this was the topic of how do we address this? Because with electronic tools, obviously, the planner has the ability to send it to many, many locations very quickly with the click of a mouse. So that has been the biggest challenge. We'll talk more about that, but just a factoid, if you will, about that is the ERFPs have increased 300% or over 300% in the last 3 years. So obviously the sales teams haven't increased their staffing by 300%, but they're having to try to manage these RFPs coming through. So then if you take that along with the fact that a lot of times in these RFPs there's incomplete information, and that slows down the process. Also on the RFPs, they're looking for very tight turnarounds right now, and that's kind of the business world that we're living in. But when almost everything's a 24-hour turnaround, it makes it very, very challenging. The thing that the CVBs and the hotels will tell you all the time is the more complete that RFP, the more complete and faster the response is going to be. And we're going to talk a lot about that today, I think.
Absolutely, Rick. Well said. So I think if we take one thing and really tie it as a uniform thread through all this, is it really is that knowledge empowers you, both from the planner side and from the hotelier and destination side. The more we know up front, the better the leads can be not only responded to, but hopefully, like John was saying, the more complete the responses will be as well. So, Rick, I think that consistently folks get frustrated, and the planner folks get frustrated because they don't really get a lay of the land. They don't have kind of some key information before they start hitting send. So I wondered, Rick, if you could just educate us a little bit about how your team or teams of Convention and Visitors Bureau sales professionals throughout the country, what is some of the typical information that you think you could impart that would help planners before they even hit send?
Right. I think a lot of planners maybe look at it like, well, it's another step, and I don't have time to make another step. But the problem is if you don't take that step to talk to your CVB rep, you may end up sending a lead that goes into a black hole because you're looking for a program, as an example, over a super high demand time frame. So you're either going to get responses back that are no good and don't meet your needs, or you don't get a response back at all. So please keep in mind that the CVBs are here to help you and guide you. And, we have the same goal as the planner. We want you to be able to book your program in our destination. So we're going to do everything we can to help you. So a couple of things that we can point out, of course, are, are there any citywides going on during the time frame that you're going to be here, or special events? We can talk to the transient versus the group demand mix, or to state it a different way, preferred patterns for the market versus value time frames that we're looking at as well. As an example, in Greater Palm Springs, a lot of people just simply don't know that most of our demand is on the weekend. So if you're trying to place a program here over the weekend, your rates are going to be usually dramatically higher. And if we can move your meeting sometimes midweek, we can save you $60, $80, $100 a night. And even for an experienced planner like John Huffman, I'll toot his horn for a minute. But I mean, John is very busy. As he said, he's sending out many leads per week. So he knows this market very well. But who's to say that he's in the midst of everything? He's sending the lead out. He thinks he's crossed all his T's and dotted his I's. But at the end of the day, he forgot one piece about Greater Palm Springs, and he's trying to send this lead out, and it's over our Coachella Festival in April, right, as an example. So he's not going to get, he either won't get responses back, or they're going to come back very, very high and nowhere close to what he needs to get. So again, we're just here to help.
And I think you bring up an interesting point, and I don't think that that it's always known that this information is readily available, that you will have a conversation with a planner on the front end about what demand is in your destination, weekday versus weekend. And in one destination, weekend may be a very high demand time. You turn around and go to a different destination, and that's their need period, right? So
absolutely,
it is changing. That lens is changing year to year, weekday to weekend, seasonally, and you are the arbiter of kind of painting that picture.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to use the term expert, but our team, our team should be the experts on the destination. So we're going to be able to point you in the right direction and kind of refine your RFP to make sure that it rises to the top when it gets to the hotels.
Great. So I picked this slide because I think it kind of beams healthy, right? And I think that this is what we are finding. I know, John, you really agreed that, consistently across all marketplaces, you see rates up,
yep,
you see date availability down, and you hear these buzzwords, compression, revenue management, and hotels managing their risk on a regular basis.
It's correct. I think what's happened in the last 2 years is the economy has grown dramatically, and I think a lot of people, a lot of the clients who I've worked with for years, it's really talking to them and educating them at this point, saying, you know what, it's not 2008 anymore, where a lot of hotels were really sitting empty for the most part during various seasons of the year. I've seen, as I mentioned, in the last 2 years that this occupancy level can continue to build in all of the primary and secondary markets. And what I have found is even trying to book now 8 months to a year out, virtually no availability in these markets, which is really surprising. And so what I'm trying to do is to explain to our clients that if there's any chance that they can start the search earlier in the year for a program later this year or for next year, they will find better availability. They will probably find better pricing as well. Again, I know that that is not always a given. I know a lot of these programs are booked very short term. They come up at the last minute. But if there's any possible pre-planning or pre-site selecting, I think it benefits the client in the long run.
Good point, John. And Rick, I know you've touched on this a bit, but meanwhile, back in the hotel sales office, in this barrage of increase of RFP demand and the ERFP that you discussed, you do have people looking to be able to evaluate leads quickly. And I wondered if you could just touch on what the internal evaluation process looks like in a hotel.
Absolutely. I've sat through many of these. we have them on property daily. So they're called a lot of times business review meetings. So what takes place in those is essentially the salespeople come in and they try to sell the RFPs they have on their desk to the revenue manager, to the director of sales, and sometimes to the general manager. So you have all of those people looking at all these leads that just came in the day prior, and they're trying to put the puzzle together, so to speak, right? So this goes back to my earlier comment about the more information the hotel has, the better response time and better response quality that you're going to get back. So when that salesperson, if you can just picture this, is trying to, I use the term sell the revenue manager and director of sales on this program, the more information they have in their arsenal, the better. Because when the revenue manager says, well, these dates aren't that great, are they flexible? Can we move them 2 days prior to this or what have you? When they start asking questions, if that salesperson doesn't have the answer, then it slows down the process. So now either that's off the table or the salesperson has to try to go back to the client, to the planner, and try to get more answers for them.
So we're kind of full circle now back to the power of the information that you give and how it affects what you get for the meeting. John, what prevents planners, from your perspective, from giving all this needed information out up front?
Well, in my experience, I have found that our clients who we are working with for many years now are just so incredibly busy these days. And a lot of times the information they're receiving from the internal meeting host is not complete. There are a lot of moving parts. So I will receive the initial program requirements, but there could be general items in that RFP that say breakouts needed 4 to 10 each day. Attendance 100 to 150. Well, that's hard to translate or to put into an RFP when sending it to the hotel, because as a former hotelier, I think it's really helpful if I can have as specific information in terms of attendance numbers as well as the actual program agenda, because therefore I'm going to get a more accurate, realistic quote from the hotel. If I'm going with a lot of generalities, I'm not going to get a correct quote the first time around. I think also in a lot of cases, and I've seen this in the last 2 years really increase, for a lot of these national meetings, I think there are a lot of players behind the scenes within the company who give input as to where they want to hold the meeting. And so I will find that on any given occasion for, say, a national meeting, I could be checking at least 5 to 6 cities for each program. We'll find that at the last minute, the date will shift back and forth. So these are things we try to get up front to give the hotel as clear an idea of the program agenda, the dates, the room block, but it's not always easy. And it is because basically the client is so busy and there are many people giving input in terms of the specs for a particular program.
Well, John, you bring up a good point, which is internal stakeholders or internal decision makers that maybe have to also be educated as well, right? That they need to understand that the quality of the information or lacking information won't result in them getting such a competitive quote. So education all around for the planner, for the hoteliers, and then for the internal stakeholders many times who are kind of invisible to the process but having a lot of impact.
Very correct. Very, very true. Yeah. And I always say, to our client, if there is a chance that the client can relay this to their internal client, they will get a very accurate quote at the very onset, and it's going to save them a lot of time when they're doing their budgeting, determining which city and which property they want, because they'll have a clear picture of all the pricing.
Okay, so let's jump into our RFP review and this RFP checklist. So this checklist, which is sort of a very succinct one-pager, was pulled from the Convention Industry Council's Apex RFP workbook. So if someone wants to see a more fleshed-out version of this, you're certainly able to find that at the CIC website. And we will be sending you after a link to our RFP workbook as well. So let's take a look at this typical RFP and have you kind of assess it. So we've broken it down into several pages because we have to be able to show it on our screen. So this would be the top part, if you will, of the RFP that we're going to look, so one of 4 sections. So this RFP then gives kind of basic event information. Rick and John, do you care to comment from your perspective what's good here, what's missing, what could be improved?
I'll touch on a few things real quickly. Yeah. So the first thing I notice is I have no idea who the attendees are. So as a hotelier, I would want to know what type of demographic are they, younger, older, male versus female, what percentages, et cetera. Also, what is this organization about? What industry is it in? And something we haven't really touched on yet are what are the objectives of the meeting? So in other words, what is success for this meeting? So if this meeting, as an example, has been in San Diego before and it was fantastic, at the hotel level, they want to know that, and they want to know, well, what made it fantastic? Because guess what? The hotel wants to do as well as they did or better. So I'll let John chime in, but that's a few things I just noticed.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just looking at this. I think everything else is very complete here. I think what's really helpful is the RFP decision date being included. I think that's very key. Let's see, the market segment I think is very key. I think also the fact that they're showing date options here, that maybe there is an additional date option than just one set of dates. I think that helps the hotel in terms of being able to provide total availability and maybe offering a variety of prices based on the different dates. Maybe they have an open period in one of these 3 date options, and they're going to offer a much lower room rate than the other 2 date options.
One more thing, Terry, if I could. So at the bottom you see, or close to the bottom, destinations under consideration. So it's, what, 6 different cities, all pretty large cities. And if you assume that each city is going to have maybe, let's just say 10 hotels that receive the lead, now you're looking at 60 hotels that are going to be going after this program all over the Northeast, it looks like. So from the hotelier's perspective, and they have 20 leads on their desk that have come through, this is one of them. Again, the more information, the better, because this has some really good information in it, but it's kind of basic. So again, the more you have, the better that salesperson is going to be able to sell it. And it's a little daunting to them to realize that, you know, there's probably going to be 60 people bidding on this, if not more.
Right, so they have a 1 in 60 chance maybe of booking this business, and maybe they have 3 or 4 other leads with a lot more information that are only maybe looking at 1 city or 2 cities. So it will have something to do with how the lead is prioritized.
Sure, again, because you have to look at everything in front of you at these business review meetings and say, okay, what are our real chances of booking this program, right?
Absolutely. Now, Rick, we always harp about history and how important event history is. It's like the planner's credit report. So they've put some history here. What do you see as red flags to the history that has been included here?
Well, you really need day-by-day history. Total block and pickup is just not enough. Exact dates, so the arrival and departure patterns can be evaluated properly. And if this isn't complete, then the hotel will be required to find out. So that's going to, they're going to have to go back to the client, to the planner, and that's going to add time to it. And of course, the planner, if they send this to 10 hotels or 40 hotels, they don't need 10 or 40 people calling them searching for more information. So that's why we really need to get as much information up front as possible. Also, there's some gaps in the history, like 2011, did it get canceled? It's just not on.
It's not even listed, right?
Right,
yeah.
It's missing. Future years would be nice to know. So where's it going to go in 14 and 15? I don't see anything about suites either, number of suites needed.
Right.
John, any other comments here?
Let's see. I'm just looking at this screen. One of the things I would put in there, and this is what I typically list in my RFP, is what type, if they're looking in all these cities, what type of properties are they looking at? Are they looking at city center only? Are they looking at resorts only, say suburban hotels or airport hotels? I think that's also helpful.
Okay.
Let me just look to see if there's anything else that I don't see. I think Rick covered everything. I was just looking at that history block, and I was going to mention the same comment about the nightly history breakdown.
Okay, and my question for the two of you would be, if there was a cancellation in 2011, or if there is an issue about history, or if you don't have it, you still want to just explain it, right?
Of course. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. One thing you touched on it earlier, Terry, about risk, and especially during high demand times, the hotels want to take on as little risk as possible. And lack of knowledge about a program equates to additional risk for them. So again, when they're selling this program to the revenue manager, director of sales, general manager, and they start asking questions like, well, what about 2011? That's making me nervous. How come that's not in here? Again, if they had the answer to that, it would help.
Okay, great. How do you feel about these meeting room specs, John?
I mean, they look very complete. Let me just scan this here. I mean, they're looking in terms of detail, 24-hour hold, store. I mean, it looks very, very thorough. I see the attendance numbers day by day. In terms of notes, I think that's a good area to put any special requirement. The exhibit information. It looks complete, pretty thorough to me.
Okay.
It's very detailed. The one question I would have is the F&B budget says $90,000, but their history, I think, said that they've spent roughly 120.
Right.
125 and 118. So again, if you're the hotel, well, what is it? Are you going to spend 90 or are you going to spend 125? Because that's going to help them sell that, right?
Right. Excellent point.
Yep.
And, I don't know if we realize that these RFPs are being scrutinized at that level, but essentially they are.
Yeah, this is very detailed, and the one, I hate to even bring this up, but it's hard to complain about having too much detail. But
but there's a lot of detail.
Yeah, it really does, but that could slow it down. Speaking of slowing it down, here's additional questions on the RFP.
So what do you think, what's the general hotel response when you see this list? And I only listed 15 that fit on this slide, but in this particular RFP, there were 38 questions that say, they're required to be answered by, like you said, 60 hotels.
Yeah. Well, again, go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I think as a former hotelier, my perspective looking at this is, I would think that a lot of this more detailed information would probably be added later. In other words, once the initial proposal is received by the client, and the client is saying, we're starting to create a short list, a hotel short list, then I'm thinking maybe at that stage, this is when I would go back to the hotel and ask these many additional questions. Unless our client